Thank you for joining. This is Michelle Savage with XBRL US, and you're here for our session on XBRL API update, Excel add-in and other developments. Thanks very much for joining the XBRL US team today. We have Campbell Pride, President and CEO, myself, Michelle Savage, VP Communication, David Torriello, VP of Operations, and Mark Ward, Applications Manager, is not going to be able to join us today, but we just want to make sure that you all know who he is. Mark is a key member of our team. So with that, I'm going to talk to you a little bit about what we're going to be covering today. First, we're going to talk just briefly about XBRL and XBRL data, for those of you not completely familiar with it. Then we're going to move on and talk about the Excel add-in. We have some interesting new features that we want to share with you. Then we'll give you some updates on our XBRL API. And finally, follow up with SEC tools. We have some new features that we want to mention. So first, let's talk a little bit about what XBRL is. And I think most of you are probably fairly familiar with XBRL, but just in brief, XBRL, Extensible Business Reporting Language, is an open, non-proprietary data standard. It is the only standard that handles financial data consistently and unambiguously, but also handles a lot more data types, including things like Boolean elements, text strings, text and tables, integers, percents, lots of different kinds of data types, which is important because many times this data is commingled. XBRL renders data fully understandable and machine readable because of the consistent structure of the standard. It allows for the seamless adaptation of changes in reporting requirements and technology, and it's available in 180 plus regulatory implementations around the world. The kinds of programs that you'll see around the world fall into a number of different categories. There are financial regulatory programs, capital markets programs, business registrars like in the UK, various tax authorities require the use of XBRL. There are a lot of government oversight programs, and also programs that we call standard business reporting, which is essentially business reporting to governments. There are different types of reporting entities within these different types of programs: public and private companies, government entities, banking institutions. And here in the United States, there are 4 different regulators that now require the use of XBRL. The Federal Deposit Insurance Corporation requires banks to report their call report information in XBRL format. That program has been in place since 2005. The Securities Exchange Commission requires public companies, mutual funds, and credit rating agencies to report in XBRL format. And that list is expanding. They're adding additional types of reports, and also additional business or reporting entities will be required to report in XBRL format in the coming years. And finally, the state of Florida has mandated the use of XBRL, and that program will begin its first compliance period in September of 2022. And also the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission this year, starting December 31st, utilities and other FERC reporters will need to file to the FERC in XBRL format. Outside the US, there's a big implementation that actually started this year, but will continue more heavily next year in Europe. The European Securities Markets Authority is now requiring any company that reports into a European Union country, and also the UK, must report using inline XBRL. So we've seen some of those entities begin reporting this year. We're going to see a lot more next year. And so the big question that we're seeking to address in this webinar is, how do you get XBRL data? Well, we know there are lots of commercial applications, lots of data providers and analytics providers that make data available in XBRL format. This is just a partial list of some of the XBRL US members that provide this data, including Altova, CalcBench, Cognitive Quant, Idacity, Intrinio, Refinitiv, Tagnify, and Bright Analyst. But we also make it available in an open source application that we have called the XBRL API. And so that's really what we're here to talk about today, how you can access data through the API a couple of different ways. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to David Torriello, who's going to talk to you a little bit more about the Excel add-in for API.
Great, thanks, Michelle, and good afternoon, everybody. We'll talk a little bit about the Excel add-in in just a second, just to pick up on what Michelle said. That API is fully compliant with an XBRL database, which is what we've built over the last 12 or so years since the early filing requirement for the SEC. We have a copy of all XBRL filings that are in the SEC's EDGAR database. We've also started exploring other data sources to pull into that database. We expect it to be a pretty rich and comprehensive environment for people who are interested in accessing standardized financial data. So onto the Excel add-in, that's probably the most convenient way to get XBRL data. We have two separate flavors. You can use it with a Google Sheet add-on. That doesn't require really any heavy lifting. To get it in Excel or to get it in your own application requires one additional step. I'll make mention of that here today. And I'd like to also direct your attention to a setup video that's really designed to get you started with the Excel add-in. On screen right now are the enhancements that we've done since the initial release. We put the first version of this Excel add-in out earlier this year. I think it was in February-March timeframe. Got some feedback from some members, got some feedback from the public about what they were looking for. Went back to the drawing board, made some changes, and hopefully what you see today is a step forward. I think anyone on our team would agree that it is significantly improved over the initial version. The features that we've focused on in the second version included adding a label endpoint or access to the label endpoint. Those are human readable versions of concepts. Not that the XBRL taxonomy isn't human readable, it's a little cumbersome. So provide some spaces, capitalization, punctuation, that kind of thing. A lot of users that come to us and look at the data want to be able to match that with facts, so that when we say, let's look at the balance sheet, they can see those human readable terms along with the facts. I'll show you that with a template in just a little bit. We simplified some of the options for getting data and provided some basic fields as default return values based on some, again, as I said, feedback that we got, so that out of the box, you don't really need to make a lot of decisions in order to get data back. Having said that, working with XBRL data is like drinking from a fire hose. You really want to be careful because you can get a lot of data back really easily, but it may not be the data that you want, and you might spend a whole lot of time sorting and sifting. So this task pane that's in Excel is really designed to help get you started, but it is not the only way to get the data. Manipulate the templates, manipulate the formulas, and really you'll get what it is that you're looking for. We also added some sort and order functionality, as well as some limits and offsets, again, to help you structure the results that come back to you so that they are meaningful from the get-go. And you can really take the next step and start editing in the cell, in the worksheet, in order to fine-tune what your query is. Because the data, the metadata connected with the facts is pretty extensive. And there's really no convenient way for us to build a mechanism that would let you decide which filters to use in all cases in the right-hand side of an Excel workbook. It would just go on and on and on forever. Finally, some new output options that I'll just mention briefly when we get into the task pane. Michelle, if you would advance the slide. As I said just a second ago, the Excel add-in, Michelle, thank you. The Excel add-in is based on endpoints that we have for the API. I'm showing you on this slide one endpoint, the fact endpoint, probably the most popular endpoint. And that fact endpoint has a number of different facets to it, filters, if you will. If you look at these three columns, they actually are a single form that is the task pane. So you can choose from a specific report or an entity, a company, and get results. You can go by SIC code. You can filter by year or by period. Any one of those, just by itself, is probably going to give you a significant number of data points that returns. So start thinking almost from the get-go about what it is you really want to be looking at. From the beginning, you probably just want to be looking at some reports. So we've put that at the top, and I'll show you that in just a second. The limit and the offset, again, those are ways to kind of filter or ways to go beyond what's initially presented on screen. That's offset. All of this is defined in the documentation that we provide. And that documentation is on our website, along with the get up and get started video that we've done for Excel or we've done for Google Sheets. Finally, on the right-hand column, and then I'll go over to my screen. On the right-hand column, we have some default fields that we've pre-populated for fact values. Here we're showing you what the concept is, what the fact value itself is, the fiscal period, and the fiscal year for that data point. Another enhancement in this version, significant enhancement that I alluded to earlier, is the three buttons along the bottom. Initially, we provided just the function and the data. To that, we've added a couple of other options. You can get just the data without the function so that you can copy it and take it to another spreadsheet, a different model that you may be using. Or you can get just the query. They both have good uses. I'm going to focus on the query use in just a minute. But first, I want to take you to our website. Michelle, I'm going to grab the screen from you. And come to the XBRL data community. This hangs off of the using data option that's on the homepage of our site. So if you're at xbrl.us, move your mouse over to using data and you see several options drop down. Select the data community option, and this is where you're going to land. To get the add-in, you would go to the store if you're in Excel. To learn a little bit more about it, you can click this button, Get Data in Excel. I mentioned a startup video. It's right here in this gray box that says Watch Introductory Videos to help get started with Google Sheets or Excel. 2 separate videos. Each one of them will address the basics of either copying a spreadsheet from Google or requesting client ID and secret pairs and using them to log in. So those are the 2 hurdles, if you will, to getting the data. I mentioned the documentation. It's right over here on the right-hand side of the page. This documentation is also available from inside of the Excel application. We'll take a look at that in just a minute. Michelle, are there any questions at this point?
We just had a question about whether the recording will be posted after the webinar, and yes, it will. Also, just a reminder, I don't think I mentioned this at the beginning, if you do have questions, you can click on the Q&A link on your screen, and then you can submit your questions that way.
Great, thanks. So I switched over to Excel. I have it open. I have the XBRL filed data add-in open. And I've actually done a query just so we can move ahead here and learn a little bit about getting away from using the task pane exclusively and really manipulating the query, and then later on manipulating the formulas that you build based on these queries. So I've got a fact function. I'm looking at Microsoft corporations facts, that's their CIK. If I type here, right, I get Microsoft Corporation. And unfortunately, it adds here. Well, fortunately, it adds here. The other thing I can do is search. If you haven't used this, search by report, right? Again, Microsoft and Microsoft Corporation. I could choose their 10K. We'll do that in just a second. But for right now, I have CIK for Microsoft. Oop, that got disappeared, unfortunately. I'll bring it back here. CIK for Microsoft. I would encourage you to take a look up here at the formula bar. That's the CIK. We're going to look at filtering by period of year, so period, fiscal period. The concept I've chosen is revenue from contract with customer, excluding assessed tax. You can find these. We've actually preloaded the 2021 US GAAP taxonomy. So just like we did with the report, if you start typing the name of the concept, the label for the concept, you should get a shorter and shorter list of options to choose from. I want the latest facts. I want dimensions to be included and dimensions and facts without dimensions to be included. So I've chosen the null case. By default, I think it's set to false. And then I've selected some metadata to support the fact numerical data. That's this column C. And that includes the member local name and the dimension local name. When I choose get query, what I should get is a rerun of the data that we just went after through the fact task pane. Pretty straightforward, pretty easy. All of a sudden, I know a little bit more about Microsoft's business segments for its revenue from contract with customer excluding assessed tax. I can start tweaking this query by taking the dimension local name and maybe just looking at product or service axis. So if I come into the formula and I type in, hopefully my typing is good today. Now I'm just looking at the product or service axis. If I decide that I want to look at it by the member local name instead of sorting by year, which I did by default, or excuse me, when I initially ran the query, I set these sort options. I can manipulate the query itself so that the period fiscal year comes after the member local name. Oop. And so now I'm looking at devices, member, across all of the years. So again, I go back to, it could be a big wash of data for you, or you could get just the data points you want very quickly. I could add CIKs to this, assuming other companies are using that same element for reporting. But let's say I just wanted to do a 10K. We'll go back to the very beginning here. And I took the 10K. I'm not going to bother changing these. It's pretty close. The only thing I don't have here, oh, wait a minute, is concept. So I choose concept from the list. Oh, it's going to come up first, but maybe I want to know the year first. So I drag and drop so that the fiscal year is the first data field that's reported. And maybe for some reason, I want to alphabetize concepts, but I don't want to know anything about I don't want to sort, excuse me, by period fiscal year. So I'm not going to need the member. I'm not going to need the dimension. Yeah, I'll keep the entity name. So I've got the fields that I want now. Instead of just getting the query, I want to do the function and the data. I've left, unfortunately, the one element in. But if I trim that out, and if I choose to turn the dimensions off, I should get the facts that are in that 10K. I'm going to move over to a template that we built and put up on our website on that page that I showed you just a couple of minutes ago. As I do that, Michelle, are there any questions I can answer?
Yes, David, a couple of questions came in. The first question is, is just in terms of accessing the web account or accessing XBRL file data. And the question is trying to work with you. It's asking for my XBRL US web account to get to the XBRL file data. And I think, and correct me if I'm wrong on this, David, but you do need to have an XBRL US web account. So you can just register yourself. It's free to do. But you just need to get an XBRL US account and register for that in order to have access to the XBRL file data.
I see that question, and I will follow up with you, April. Appreciate it. In addition to the username and password, your user account and your password for XBRL US, there is also a client ID and a secret that you're required to put in the login in order to get the XBRL file data add-in to function, even to open up. And so, April, I will follow up with you. For anyone else who's got a similar question, I would encourage you to take a look at the video that's on our XBRL data community page that shows you step-by-step not only how to use the client ID and secret request form, but also how to put those into the login form that's on the task pane.
David, April had a follow-up question saying that
Sure.
Cal State, she is from Cal State Fullerton, which is an XBRL US member. And the difference there, April, it's a good question, because the difference is if you are not a member of XBRL US, you do have access to the API and to a certain set of data. But as a member, you get a larger, you have greater access to data. So you'll get more data as a member. So there is a difference.
And again, April, I'll make sure I follow up with you.
Yeah, so we're encouraging people to become members, individual member or corporate member, you will have access to a greater amount of data. A couple other questions that we're getting here. And I don't know that we want to go through these examples online, but David, the question is from the Excel API, can you compare Microsoft to peers?
Sure, so I have a 10K here, right? That's from Microsoft. The report endpoint probably would be able to support that. Campbell, that's probably more of a you question. Could I do a comma delimited set of reports? I think I can.
Yes, you can. So yeah, you can compare companies. You can. It's probably easier to do multiple API calls for that, and then just to set up these are the metrics I want to compare, and then have different API calls for each country, for each company. You could, in what David's doing here, you could put multiple report identifiers in and then pull all that data back. Then you just see it by rows rather than columns across, which is probably what you really want to see. So both of those are possible depending on what you want to do. So you can pull this information back, and to do the comparison, the API doesn't do the comparison itself. You just need to bring all the data you want back and then do the comparison in Excel, just using the functionality and the functions available in Excel.
So just really quickly, because I want to give it over to Campbell here. This template, again, is freely available. The only thing it requires you to do is to manage the green cells that are on row 6. So there's a number there. That's the DTS ID. So that DTS ID comes back when you use this select by report or excuse me, select report by entity name, and type in whatever company you want to type in, bring up a report. Here's a 10Q from Alphabet. I've copied that value. If I paste it here, it may take a few minutes, but eventually what I'm going to wind up getting is the balance sheet. And actually, I'm getting the balance sheet and the parenthetical. So I've used the label endpoint. You can see a little bit here. I've used that label endpoint with the concept ID. Both of these are hidden. I'll show you this in a minute. To pull the human readable labels back, match it up with the fact values, and let you know that it's the consolidated balance sheets. Again, all you need to do is manipulate these 3 cells, and you're up and running looking at financial reports. If you want to do more work, you can just ungroup and start taking a look at the queries, because maybe there's something here that's useful to you. Here, this just reports back, this first row just reports back what's in blue. And this 4th row does the heavy lift here on the relationship endpoint that Campbell's going to talk to you about in just a second. That really is where the structure for the financial report is located. I'm going to stop sharing my screen. Hopefully that was helpful. If you have questions, put them on the XBRL API forum. Again, that's linked from that URL that I showed you earlier, the data community. That's really like the center part of using this structured data.
David, while we're transitioning over to Campbell, and Campbell begins sharing his screen, we have a couple more questions.
Sure.
The first from Stephen Percoco. Could you do something simple like pull up Microsoft's fiscal 2021 product revenue from the income statement?
Yeah, if it's on the income statement, it was on that template that I just showed you.
Yeah, the answer
Okay.
the answer is yes.
Yeah.
So you can pull those up as long as they've reported in their filing. If they've got a breakdown in their filing of revenue by product, then that information will be available through the API.
Yeah, I had showed the balance sheet. That was like all I was showing on that template, and I think that's what's preloaded on the template. But again, if you change that green cell that says balance sheet, just change it to income statement. You should get the entirety of the income statement and be able to identify product revenue.
Okay, and then the next question, I just want to move through these quickly, David, is can you find data by XBRL tag, like by the US GAAP tag? And do you have to be a member to do so, to do that search?
Yes and no. That's the fact endpoint. That's probably the simplest use of the fact endpoint. You'll remember that the first example that I showed you, the revenue by segment, I was using a US GAAP taxonomy tag to pull back revenue from contract with customer. I think it was before tax, or maybe it was after tax. I don't know, I can't remember. But anyway, I was pulling all of that data back because it matched that single element. So not only can you look at an entire report, you can focus on a single element. Furthermore, you can focus on the dimensions that roll up to the total that appears on the face of the financials.
Great. Okay, then the next question before Campbell jumps in. Is it possible to supply a list of, say, 10 ticker symbols or CIK and then fetch, for example, annual sales for the prior 5 or more years? Or do I need basically one pull per company? And if I can, just respond to this, and David, tell me if I'm correct on this, is you could, I think that probably the easiest way to do this is to pull a single ticker symbol, and then you're going to have the basically the API code, and then just swap out the CIKs for each of the 9 subsequent ones, and you could line them all up in a single spreadsheet. Would that be accurate?
You can. Yeah.
Go ahead, Campbell.
Yeah, you can do that. Or I think what the question was asking is, can you pull all this data in a single pull? And the answer is yes. So you can put in, you can supply comma separated lists to the API. So you could put comma separated list of all the tickers plus a comma separated list in a single API call, all the years of data. And if you wanted multiple elements, you could put a comma separated list of the elements you wanted as well. And then you get all that data back in a single API request, and then that'll come back as, if you're looking at Excel, that'll come back as like separate individual rows for each one of those items that you requested. But as Michelle mentioned, it might be better to break it up into separate API calls if you wanted to put that data across the page in Excel, or you could have some formula which takes it and rearranges in Excel. It's up to you. But the API allows you to either pull them as individual. If it's fact data and that the data is of the same type, you can pull that data in a single API request.
Okay, great, Campbell. And then just last question, and then I think we'll move on, is where do you get the template? And the answer to that is just go to our website, and we can actually send the link out to everybody tomorrow with a follow-up with a replay. Mm-hmm. Okay, so Campbell, why don't we go ahead and you get started on your section. And I'm going to share my screen again. I'm sorry, I forgot about that.
If you could bring up the slides, that'd be great.
Yep. Okay. All right, does everybody see the slides now?
Yep, they're up. So for those who are familiar, have used the API in the past, we've added a few additional fields. And the first one we'll talk about is the report document index. And this was something we added because people were struggling to get the data that they wanted, particularly after the SEC, we started loading all the 8K data into the database. So what this field was added to basically separate different document types and allow sorting of those document types based on the earliest to the latest. So what this means is that before we had a field for that for reports. So you could say, give me the latest document that was reported. With all the 8Ks being coming in, if you use that, you just get the latest 8K. You'd always get the latest 8Ks because so many 8Ks get reported. So what this allows you to do is to say, give me the latest 10K, or give me the latest 10Q, or give me the latest 8K. So it's really, this index is based on a combination of not only the latest report by entity, but the latest report by entity and by document type. So this is kind of useful. So now if you want to get the latest 10K or the latest 10Q in an API call, you can get it. And you can see here on the slide in blue, this requires really, well, it doesn't require it, but if you put the report document type in and the document index, and you can see you've got 1 and 2, this will give you the latest, the 10Ks from the last two 10Ks that were reported by the company. So that basically allows you to pull that information back by fact if you want, or by report as well. So we can go to the next slide. And I'm going to show an example of this in a minute. We'll just go through the new things that have been added. The next item is a fact accuracy index. And this was added because as filings are coming into the SEC, most of the filings now are coming in as what's called an inline XBRL filing. And these filings basically, there's only one XBRL document now, which basically is the same as the actual filing made by the company. So the same number can be reported multiple times in a filing. So for example, cash, right? So cash can you can have the balance of cash on the balance sheet. You can have it in the cash flow statement, and maybe you've got the value of cash in the notes. And in some cases, that value for cash might be reported 3 times. So if you do an API request, you say, give me all the data that's reported in the filing, you'll get cash back. The same values will come back 3 times. In some cases, the values that are reported are slightly different, because they might say we had cash of 3.1 billion, or they might have another disclosure that says we've got cash of 3,156,323. So you'll have these different values reported for the same number. So what the fact accuracy index allows you to do is that you can specify which one you want. So if you just put 1 in, you're going to just get the most accurate number that was ever reported in the filing. And if you've got multiple numbers reported in a filing with the same accuracy, it's just basically going to allow you just to bring back the most accurate one. And this applies to strings as well. So if you use it on a string value that's reported, it'll give you the most detailed string value that was reported. And this really came out of the changes to inline XBRL. Prior to inline XBRL, you weren't allowed duplicate facts, but with inline XBRL, you can. So this is something you probably, if you're doing any queries of data, you probably just want to have this set to 1. So you're only going to get 1 value. Okay, so we'll show you that in a minute as well when I share my screen. So we go the last one that we added, Michelle, the next one. Oh, sorry, on fact accuracy index. I've got a little example here. Let's just go through that first. So I've got an API call here, which is going to pull back, and this is for Apple, it's going to pull back the cash and cash equivalents at carrying value. And so if I just go and pull that data back, I'm going to get 3 values for cash and cash equivalents at carrying value. And you can see the amounts and the fact value are all the same. They're all for 2020. They're all for the year, but there were 3 values reported. So on every one of these facts, we have this fact accuracy index. And what this will do is, you can see it's got 1, 2, 3 on it. What this means is, if you just put a value, put the fact accuracy index of 1, you're only going to get the single row back. You won't get all 3 because you kind of don't want them. They're kind of useless. Then you don't want to have to go through and remove the duplicates. It's just a pain to do that in Excel or whatever application that you're using. So you can see what you can do is you can see in blue in the first paragraph here, we say fact.accuracy index equals 1. If you put that on your queries, then you're just going to make sure you only get a single record for fact values that may be reported by a company. And this is really only going to apply to only a handful of elements that are in the filing where companies will report the same value multiple times, things like the cash. It's different from the Ultimus index, which some of you may be aware of. What the Ultimus index is that represents, it's an index representing when this value is reported. So for example, you can see here in a given filing, the cash and cash equivalents value, the first one is, this is the most accurate one that's reported. But in that filing, whereas the fact Ultimus index 10, that means that cash and cash equivalents has been reported 10 times subsequent to this filing being made. So, in the queue, this value for 38016 has been reported 9 times in filing subsequent to the 10K coming in. And this is an Apple 10K, so it was, this was filed 12 months ago or 9 months ago. So there have been queues that have been reported, and they've reported the same value. So what the fact Ultimus index does is it basically just tells you how many times that fact value has been reported and what instance of it has it been reported. So in this case, in many cases, you want to say, give me the fact Ultimus index of 1. And that's typically when you're searching across multiple filings, because you kind of want to get the latest value that was reported for cash and cash equivalents at the year end 2020. But the fact accuracy index is good when you're just looking at the data within a filing. And if you're looking at data within a specific filing, you don't want to use the fact Ultimus index because, if you say it equals 1 on a specific filing, you may not get the fact just because that fact has been reported in subsequent filings to the one you're looking at. All of this is just data to help you manipulate the data. If it doesn't make sense, at this point, it's not surprising, but once you start to pull data, and if you see something's missing, then you may want to look at that, that you haven't set the fact Ultimus index to 1. And if you've got data that's duplicated, you may want to say, okay, this data is being duplicated in the original filing. So you've got tools there that can help you, or parameters that can help you exclude those rows. So we go to the next slide, please. And the final one we've added, this isn't in production yet, but it's going to be added over the next couple of weeks. This is running in our test environments at the moment. We thought we'd mention it now. Is this the report event items? And this has come up because we have a lot of 8Ks now being filed in XBRL. and people had complained they didn't, you got all these 8Ks, but you don't know what they mean. The 8K could apply to anything. So the SEC has a event items flag on every 8K where the company identifies what type of what's the reason for the 8K. So we've added those reasons into the database as well. So it might be, the 8K might be because there's a bankruptcy notice, there's an acquisition or a disposition of assets, or there's a change in control of the entity. And the SEC has published on their websites what these codes are. For example, bankruptcy is 1.03. So what you can do is, if you've got an 8K, you can pull these event items now from the API, so you can see why an 8K was filed. But you can also say, hey, give me all the 8Ks that relate to a bankruptcy, or give me all the 8Ks that relate to an acquisition or a change in ownership. So if you wanted, you could then, you could query the API for a given set of companies on a regular basis, so that you can see if there are certain events that affect the company that you might be interested in. And there's a link here, and if we make the slides available, we can go to this. You can see all the different categories are that the SEC has for these event items. But we thought it'd be useful to make those available, because we just had many questions about people saying, well, what's this 8K for, and what's this 8K for? As you may or may not be aware, the 8Ks themselves, the cover of the 8K is tagged, but not the individual facts in the 8K unless it's a financial statement. So these event items are kind of necessary, so you know what the 8K actually relates to. You can search on these event item types. So you can put in a string delimited list, and then it acts like an OR. So if you said, I want to know everything that's a bankruptcy or an acquisition, then you can put 1.03, 1.04, 5.02, and then it'll return any 8Ks that have one or more of those particular event items. So it's really like an OR. We don't have the ability, so you can say, give me only those 8Ks that are a bankruptcy and a change in control, because it's unlikely someone's going to do that. But that's the way it's been structured. So those will be available in the next couple of weeks, so you'll see those. I'm just going to share my screen quickly. I think that was all of them, right, Michelle? And I'll just show you how these things work in reality. So it's kind of talking about, it's a little bit hard to get the hang of it. So just on the accuracy, for example, this is Apple. You can see here's the, like David had pointed out, I'm just going and getting this API call. I'm getting commercial paper. And you can see this is for Apple and their 10K, and they reported a value. They reported two values in their filing for commercial paper for 2020, from 2020 year. And one was, 4.9 billion, 4.996 billion, and one was 5 billion. This is probably reported on the notes. This is probably reported, in detail on the face of the financials. And you can see this fact in accuracy index. We've requested that to come back. So then you can see, oh, this one's got 1 and this one's got 2. So this is the more accurate number. So if you want to get the more accurate number, you can specify it. But if you go out and just say, give me the commercial paper number for Apple, you're going to get 2 values back, one being less accurate. To restrict it to 1, you can just put the 1 in. And this is the example we were talking about before for cash and cash equivalents. And you can see here, you got the fact accuracy index 1, 2, 3. This is for 2019. This is for 2020. These relate to every individual fact that's the same. So you can see you got 1, 2, 3 here, 1, 2, 3 here. And this one for 2019, the fact ultimus index is actually the same. It's because this was a 10K from a year ago. The values for cash for 2019 haven't been reported again in any subsequent filings made by Apple. But the values for 2020 have. They've made Q filings, and obviously those have come up. And you can see these are just here. In terms of the document index, just talking about that quickly. This is the one where we talked about if you want to get the latest 10K or the latest 10Q. So in this query here, this is just saying, give me, I've got the document index equal to 1, and I'm asking for the 10K. So this is going to give me this, the last 10K filed by Apple was in 2020, 1030. This one, I haven't asked for I haven't put the report index in. I just say, give me all the 10 Qs. You can see here are all the 10 Qs, and this is the report document index associated with them. So you can see, okay, blah, 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 this is what they are. So if you want to get the latest 10K, you can put the 1. And if you don't put a document in, if you just say, give me the report index across all reports, you can see, so the latest 10K reported was nearly a year ago, the latest Q was 2020-7028, and the latest 8K was 2020-0805. So this is the same, this is basically the same query, but it's just like this one doesn't, we're not specifying the document we want back. This one we're specifying the 10K, and we want the latest 10K. So that's kind of how this works. And as David mentioned earlier, you can, this is how you get it. This is just, you can just easily allow, this is the report, here it is. You can see the filing type index is actually, we added it into here. So when you go and get this data, hold on, let me refresh, just log me out. So this is how you do it. It's how I want to get the report. I want to get Apple, let's say. This autofills, this is using the API to autofill this. I want to get, let's say I want to get 10K, but I also want to get the 10Q. And this is what I mentioned earlier, you can do a comma separated list. I want the latest value. I can add the document type, the document index, just so you see what it is. So we'll come back, and then I can, if I get these, you can see, okay, I've got the latest 10Q was this one, and the latest 10K was this one. So it just allows you to quickly pull this data. This is just an API. This API may be particularly useful if you just want to, if you want to put up a web page or whatever, and you want to call the API and pull this data up. You can sort by, then you can sort by this index and get the latest data as well. The event items, this hasn't been implemented, but I can show you the API call and test. This is kind of just so you can see what it looks like. This is what you get back. So I've just done this is a request that says, give me the report events for 2.01, which is an acquisition. So if I run this query, I'm going to get back Kimco Realty, for example. They did an acquisition. They announced an acquisition on 0804. ProSite Global, this is basically all the event types associated with the 8K. Sometimes there's going to be votes or whatever to approve it, but you can see each of these has 2.01 in it. I'm requesting give me 2.01. So this will give you a list of all the companies that had some merger or some acquisition. Kimco actually bought Weingarten, so they kind of both are reporting it. So you can see here that it just gives you a list. So it's kind of useful. You can pull this data back as you want. So
Campbell, just a quick question about the event items. Can you put that with the fact endpoint and return the facts from that 8K?
The event items works as a report. So basically, any information you're getting about a report is the event items will only apply to an 8K. So you should only be using that associated with an 8K report. It's not really, if you're going to pull a fact back, it's not really, it doesn't really make sense to use that for that purpose.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, so that's pretty much everything related to the new items that were added. It's just really, as David mentioned earlier, like drinking from a fire hose. So you're trying to get all this data. And so then it makes it very difficult to, unless you have these additional query options, it just allows you to basically cut down the amount of data that's coming back from the API. So that's its primary use. So David, so Michelle, you want me to hand it back to you, or do we have time just to go?
Campbell, can you do one other thing? Can you just give a quick tour of the other tab on the task pane, the validate tab?
Yeah, so one of the things that we added in terms of this was something called validate, and this is really anyone can use this, but it allows companies to basically validate a filing. So if you want to basically look at a filing which has been submitted to the SEC, you can see if it's got any errors in it. I actually use this if I'm using the data, if I know a company has a lot of errors in a filing, then I may be a bit more cautious about using that data. So you can, and I got some filings here which have errors, but if I have a company, so for example, what I can do is I can take one of the filings that are made with the SEC. I'm just randomly picking one, and then what it allows me to do is then run what's called the DQC rules. I can run these rules. I can run a specific rule if I know what it is, and I can check the filing. And what this does is then it takes that filing and it runs like a whole bunch of algorithms on it, and then basically will come back with, are there problems in the filing or inconsistencies? Does the balance sheet not balance? Are the relationships between elements correct? This is primarily, it's incorporated in the API, but it's primarily can be used by filers so that they can validate their filing before they file with the SEC and make sure they don't have any DQC rules, DQC rule errors, and then they can get it back into Excel. Usually this will take like a minute or so to process, so it can chug along and do this. But this allows you to do that, and then here you can see, okay, it's got some errors that have come back. And what this is saying, it's saying, look, this particular company has reported values for the first quarter, second quarter, third quarter, and fourth quarter. But if you add these up, they don't add to the total amount that they reported for the total. So it's kind of giving you some information around this. So like here, the sum of the for revenue from contract with customers, they had 239. If you added up all the Qs, you get 239 million or 239,000. But when the value they reported only had 237. And this will probably be a filing. A lot of cases, it's a filing in the underlying paper filing. It's kind of hard for filers to check the things if all the periods add up. But this is really for filers to check. If you're a data user, you might be interested in using it. I don't know, but that's also available in the API. So, Michelle, I'll hand it back to you and I'll stop sharing.
Great, thanks very much, Campbell. And Campbell, while I'm in the process of switching on my screen, we did get another question. Not every company uses the standard XBRL tag name for a given line item. What does XBRL US have available to collect to deal with this data situation?
So I presume they were referring to extensions.
Well, or it could be different types of, different elements used that represent essentially the same thing, but there are multiple, like the normalization process, I'm thinking.
Okay, so let's just talk about that quickly. So companies can use extensions. So if they use an extension on the balance sheet, and that way because they have something specific to them, the API includes extensions. There are options in the API, so you can only pull back the extension items, or you can pull back items or concepts that are not extensions or are extensions. You can kind of go either way on it. If people are reporting multiple different things, let's say for, like accounts receivable, but they've got different, they want trade receivables, or they've broken it down to the nth degree, what you can do is you can query the calculation relationships that are in the API, so you can see what things that they're using to add up things like current assets. And we use that a lot for some of the algorithms we have to normalize the data. So if you want to do that, you really need to use what they've defined in the calculation relationships, and you can pull that through the API as well. We didn't show it today, but if you look at download the Excel, you can basically navigate all the information that they've provided to the SEC, and you can pull that data back through the API.
Great, thanks very much, Campbell. Okay, we're going to move on to the last section. I know we only have a few minutes left, but I wanted to cover another application that's available to our members, which is, kind of the easiest tool to use out of everything that you've seen today. The API is probably, something a little slightly more technical. The Excel template gives you something a little bit, more user-friendly. And then the SEC tools for filers is an application that's designed with a very simple user interface. It lets you query and extract different data sets. And you can screen on the XBRL US database a variety of different ways. You can see here, you can screen, if you look at the left-hand column, you can screen by company, by time period, by the type of data reported using the XBRL US GAAP concept name, like assets or liabilities. You can even screen by individual filing. And in the example that I'm showing here, I've actually, let's see, gone ahead and screened on General Motors. If you look at the red highlight in the bottom, General Motors Financial Company, August 4th of 2021. So it's just pulling up a single filing, and I'm asking for values reported by filing. So that's going to give me all the facts. And as you can see, you can get, the individual fact values and which can be numeric or they can be text. And then it gives me the time period and different information about the data point. And then you can download that into an Excel spreadsheet very easily. You can also pull it up in HTML. So let's say you're getting a lot of text information, like say text blocks. You can pull those into HTML, and it's actually a great way to do an analysis looking at how different companies report, say a similar disclosure. So this is a tool that's been around for a while, and we've added some additional features to it that I wanted to walk you through. So if we look here, I'm using the same screen on General Motors. So down here, General Motors for this particular filing, but here I'm going to pull up just the concepts reported by filing. And I can click on the links that you see here in the upper right corner so that I can download the information into Excel. I can actually go to the filing itself on the SEC website, or I can download the SEC provided Excel spreadsheet of the financials, which is posted up there too. And I can even download a zip file of the full instance document. So these are some like little applications that can be used by public companies doing peer analysis, by companies just doing other types of investment analysis. And these are little tricks that can help you as you navigate through this tool. So many of you also use, that are using this tool today, use the text search capability. And that's what this screen is looking at right here. It allows you to search through the text in the filing that you've selected. So you select, like in this case, I'm pulling up Hilton Hotels and Marriott Hotels, and I'm going to do a search on the word COVID. So I do a search on the word COVID to find out like how has the pandemic affected their financials and the outlook of the company. And this is doing a full text search through everything, not just through the XBRL data. Just to let you know, we have added some more detailed explanation of how the text search capability works in this block here. So you can use it a lot more effectively. So this is just something else that we've added into the tool that may make it a little bit easier to use. We have also added a pop-up box, which you can see here, of release notes. So, as you can see, obviously we come out with new releases of SEC tools for filers on a periodic basis. This version is 1.0.5, and we have release notes which explain what's been changed since the last one was created. And finally, just for those of you who are using SEC tools to run the data quality committee rules against your filings, we have updated the application so that you can select from various options. So when you upload a file, you can say, I just want to get SEC filer rules and approved DQC checks only. You can get SEC filer and proposed DQC checks, or just proposed data quality rule checks. So you have lots of different options. And remember, as Campbell was showing you just a few minutes ago, you can also use these options in the XBRL file data Excel add-in. So you can run a single DQC rule or multiple sets of rules there as well. So that's our full presentation. And I think there may be another question that's been submitted here. So the question we got is, what is the difference between the files at the SEC versus XBRL US? And Campbell, do you want to speak to the XBRL US database? Campbell, you might be on.
Yeah, sorry. Sure. So the database itself basically has the database itself, basically, we capture all the data that's reported to the SEC. We basically strip it all out, and all of that information is captured in the database. And the API basically allows, it's just really an interface so that you don't have to understand all the queries to be able to pull the data out of that database. But basically anything that's at the SEC, we try to take all that information and just put those XBRL files and put them in that structured format. So pretty much, I think everything in the SEC file is captured in the XBRL database at this point. We do put additional information beyond what's in the XBRL filing in the database, just to help manage some of the data, and some of the things we're talking about is, so that data is generated automatically, like normalizing the periods, and adding some of those indexes so that you can sort the data more easily rather than having to build your own functions to do that.
Great, thank you. Well, those are all of our presentations today. I want to thank everybody for joining us. Thank you, Campbell and David, for your presentations. And please, visit our website, check out XBRL data, and use some of these tools because they're free to use. Again, the API and the Excel add-in are free for anyone. You just need to get an XBRL US registration. You get additional data if you're a member. But it's a pretty low bar in terms of the membership fees. So please join us in using the data, and we hope to see you on future webinars. Thank you very much.